My name is Blanche, a 62-year-old retired nurse from Colorado. For 9 years, my son Michael and daughter-in-law Jessica lived under our roof. I tolerated their difficult behavior because I loved my son, but everything changed after my grandson was born. I still remember the shock that ran through my body when Jessica violently shoved my husband Harold and screamed at him, "Don't touch him, you're filthy!" That was the moment my patience finally shattered. I called my son later that day and said 3 words that left them completely stunned. If you're watching this from somewhere with family drama of your own, hit that like button and subscribe. I'm about to share how I finally found the courage to stand up for my family after years of disrespect. Harold and I built a good life together. Our 40 years of marriage blessed us with 3 wonderful children, Michael, Sarah, and David. We worked hard all our lives, me as a nurse at County General and Harold as a high school history teacher. When we finally retired, we looked forward to enjoying our empty nest and traveling a bit. Our modest 4-bedroom house suddenly felt spacious with just the 2 of us. Michael, our middle child, had always been the sensitive one. He graduated from college with a business degree and landed a job at a marketing firm. That's where he met Jessica. She came from the accounting department, and when he first brought her home for dinner, she seemed perfectly pleasant, always complimenting my cooking and asking Harold about his military service. But I noticed how she'd interrupt Michael or correct him about small details of their relationship stories. Still, love is blind, and Michael was clearly smitten. Their engagement happened just 6 months after they started dating. Harold thought it seemed rushed, but I reminded him that sometimes when you know, you know. We helped plan a modest wedding, though Jessica often mentioned how her friends had larger, more elaborate ceremonies just 2 weeks before the wedding disaster struck. The marketing firm downsized, and Michael lost his job. Jessica was still employed, but her entry-level accounting position didn't pay enough for the apartment they'd put a deposit on. They were devastated. "Why don't you stay with us until you get back on your feet?" Harold offered during Sunday dinner. "The house is too big for just us anyway." Michael looked relieved, but Jessica seemed hesitant. "We couldn't impose," she said, though I noticed she didn't suggest alternatives. "Nonsense," I insisted. "It's just temporary. You can save up for a few months and then find a place of your own." That temporary arrangement began 9 years ago. The first year went surprisingly well. Jessica kept their bedroom and bathroom spotless. She even cooked dinner once a week and always cleaned up afterward. Michael sent out resumes daily and eventually found a new position, though, at a significantly lower salary. They contributed a small amount for utilities, which we appreciated. We established routines that worked for everyone. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with all of us gathering around the table sharing stories from our week. Jessica would bring fresh flowers for the centerpiece, and Michael would select wines that paired well with my cooking. For Thanksgiving that first year, Jessica's parents joined us and everything felt harmonious. "This is working out better than I expected," Harold whispered to me one night as we got ready for bed. "They're good company." I agreed, feeling proud that we could help our son and new daughter-in-law during their time of need. I enjoyed having young energy in the house again and looked forward to the day when they'd move into their own place and start giving us grandchildren, though hopefully in that order. Little did I know that our generosity would slowly transform into a test of endurance that would last nearly a decade. The shift in Jessica's attitude was so gradual, I barely noticed it happening. During the second year of their stay, small incidents began accumulating. It started with Jessica rearranging the kitchen cabinets without asking. When I mentioned I couldn't find my favorite coffee mug, she said, "The kitchen is so disorganized. I fixed it for you. You should be thanking me." I bit my tongue, not wanting to seem ungrateful for her help. Harold noticed my frustration and squeezed my hand under the dinner table, our silent signal for let it go. Michael worked increasingly long hours, often leaving before we woke and returning after we'd gone to bed. This left Jessica alone with us, and she grew bolder in her criticisms. "Blanche, this chicken is so dry," she'd say at dinner. Or, "Don't you think it's time to replace these old towels? They smell musty no matter how much you wash them." Each comment stung, but Harold remained the peacemaker. "She's young," he'd remind me. "She hasn't learned tact yet." By the third year, Michael received a promotion, and I thought surely they'd begin looking for their own place. Instead, Jessica announced they were staying to save for a house down payment. She then proceeded to redecorate the living room, replacing family photos with abstract art she bought without consultation. "The place needed updating," she explained when I questioned where my mother's hand-embroidered throw pillows had gone. "Those old things made the house look like a nursing home." Family gatherings became increasingly tense. At David's birthday dinner, Jessica criticized my gift-wrapping skills in front of everyone. "Honestly, Blanche, you could at least use matching paper and ribbon. It looks like a 5-year-old wrapped these." Sarah pulled me aside afterward. "Mom, what's going on? Why do you let her talk to you like that in your own house?" I had no good answer. When I tried discussing boundaries with Michael, he seemed distracted and defensive. "Jessica just has high standards, Mom. She doesn't mean anything by it." But the comments continued and worsened. I found myself retreating to our bedroom more frequently just to escape the constant criticism. Harold and I converted the small den into a private sitting area where we could watch our programs without Jessica's commentary on our outdated taste in television. Years 4 and 5 brought even more changes to our home. Without asking permission, Michael and Jessica renovated the guest bathroom, replacing the perfectly functional fixtures with expensive modern ones. They merely informed us after the workmen had already started. "You'll thank us," Jessica insisted. "This adds value to the house." When I reminded her that we had no plans to sell our home, she rolled her eyes. "Well, someday someone will appreciate these upgrades." The unspoken implication hung in the air after we were gone. They would inherit the house anyway. I felt like a tenant in my own home, walking on eggshells to avoid Jessica's disapproval. Harold's blood pressure began rising at his checkups, though he insisted it wasn't related to the stress at home. 6 years into this arrangement, Michael came to us with bowed head and slumped shoulders. They were in financial trouble. Despite his improved salary, they had accumulated significant credit card debt. Jessica's car needed repairs, and then there were some unexpected medical bills, he explained vaguely. "We're drowning in interest payments." Harold and I exchanged glances. We'd been planning a cruise to Alaska, our first major vacation since retirement. Instead, we withdrew $15,000 from our savings to pay off Michael and Jessica's credit cards. "This is a one-time bailout," Harold said firmly as we wrote the check. "In exchange, we need you to contribute more to the household expenses." They agreed to pay $500 monthly toward the mortgage and utilities. Jessica seemed particularly unhappy about this arrangement, sighing loudly whenever she handed over the money. A month later, I accidentally opened a credit card statement addressed to Jessica. The envelope looked similar to our power bill. I was shocked to see thousands spent at luxury department stores. When I carefully broached the subject with Michael, he became uncharacteristically angry. "You had no right to look at our mail," he snapped, though I'd explained it was accidental. Later that week, during a rare moment alone, Michael confided that there were problems in his marriage. "Jessica has expensive tastes," he admitted. "We argue about money all the time." I offered to help them find a financial counselor, but he quickly backpedaled. No, we'll figure it out. Please don't mention this to Jessica. The 7th year brought another bombshell. Jessica quit her accounting job with no warning. I need to find something more fulfilling, she explained during dinner. The office environment was toxic. Harold and I exchanged worried glances. Their $500 monthly contribution would now come solely from Michael's salary. When Harold gently asked about her job search plans, Jessica snapped. Not everyone can settle for a boring career like teaching high school, Harold, she said coldly. Some of us have ambitions. The color drained from my husband's face. Harold had dedicated 35 years to teaching and had received the district's Teacher of Excellence award 3 times. I opened my mouth to defend him, but he shook his head slightly. Jessica's treatment of us worsened after she quit working. With nothing to occupy her days, she scrutinized everything we did. Blanche, you're using too much water when you wash dishes, or Harold, your coughing at night keeps us awake. See a doctor already. I found solace in my weekly church group and lunches with nursing friends. Harold retreated to his garden, spending hours tending vegetables that Jessica complained made the yard look like a farm. That November, Harold experienced chest pains while raking leaves. The emergency room doctor confirmed a minor heart attack and prescribed rest and medication. When we returned home, Jessica seemed annoyed rather than concerned. "This is so inconvenient," she muttered when I explained Harold needed quiet. "We were planning to host a dinner party this weekend." I spent weeks caring for Harold, bringing meals to our bedroom since Jessica complained about his labored breathing at the dinner table. Through it all, Michael remained largely absent, claiming work demands prevented him from helping. I later learned he'd been taking additional projects to compensate for Jessica's lost income. The 8th year brought unexpected news: Jessica was pregnant. Despite everything, Harold and I were thrilled about becoming grandparents. This joy was quickly tempered when Jessica began using the pregnancy to exert even more control over the household. "Blanche, your cleaning products are toxic to the baby," she declared, throwing out my traditional supplies and replacing them with expensive natural alternatives. My sewing room, the one space that had remained truly mine, was commandeered for the nursery without discussion. Jessica's parents purchased an elaborate crib and changing table that took up most of the space. When I offered my hand-quilted baby blanket, Jessica wrinkled her nose. "We're going with a jungle theme," she said dismissively. "That doesn't match." Despite being a nurse who had worked in maternity for 15 years, I was excluded from all doctor appointments and baby shopping trips. Jessica's mother was given the honor of attending the 20-week ultrasound, where they learned they were having a boy. "We'll name him James after my father," Jessica announced, though Michael's father's name was Joseph, a connection that would have been meaningful to Harold. We contributed $5,000 toward baby preparations, money that again came from our dwindling savings. Jessica spent it on designer baby clothes and a professional nursery decorator. When Harold suggested setting aside some for a college fund instead, Jessica laughed. "The baby deserves the best start in life," she insisted, as if our suggestion was depriving him. As her pregnancy progressed, I tried envisioning my role as grandmother, but Jessica's restrictions already seemed overwhelming. She announced that no one would be allowed to kiss the baby, hold him without washing hands, or visit if they had received certain vaccinations within 2 weeks. While some precautions were reasonable, the extensive list felt designed to limit our access. Jessica's due date arrived in early April. Michael called at 3 a.m. to say they were heading to the hospital. "We'll let you know when you can visit," he added quickly before hanging up. Harold and I dressed hurriedly and went to the hospital anyway, settling into the waiting room with coffee and nervous anticipation. 8 hours later, Michael emerged looking exhausted but happy. "It's a boy, 8 pounds 4 ounces, he announced. "Everyone's healthy." "Can we see them?" Harold asked eagerly. Michael hesitated. "Jessica's pretty tired. Maybe tomorrow." We returned the next day with balloons and gifts, only to be limited to a 15-minute visit. Jessica held baby James protectively, barely tilting him so we could see his face. When I asked if I could hold him, she claimed he had just fallen asleep and couldn't be disturbed. "The lactation consultant says minimizing stimulation is important for establishing breastfeeding," she explained with an air of authority. 3 days later, they returned home. I had prepared freezer meals, cleaned the nursery again, and set up a small bassinet in our room in case they needed a break. None of these preparations were acknowledged or used. Jessica established strict rules immediately. Visitors could only come between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Hands had to be washed with special antibacterial soap she provided. No one wearing perfume or cologne could hold the baby. Photos were prohibited unless Jessica approved them first. "I read that newborns can sense tension," Jessica informed me when I offered to watch James while she showered. "So only positive people should be around him." The implication that I might generate negative energy hurt deeply. I had delivered countless babies during my nursing career and helped many new mothers through those challenging first weeks. My experience meant nothing to Jessica. Harold was particularly devastated by the restrictions. He had been looking forward to being a grandfather for years, having missed much of his own children's early days due to teaching obligations. Now retired, he had time to be the involved grandfather he'd always wanted to be, but Jessica barely let him in the same room as James. "It's like she thinks we're going to damage him somehow," Harold confided sadly after being asked to move further away from the bassinet. "Have we become that irrelevant?" The tension built steadily over those first 2 weeks. Jessica became increasingly irritable, claiming any household noise disturbed the baby's sleep. Michael continued working long hours, leaving Jessica alone with James for extended periods. She refused my offers to help, even when I could hear her crying from exhaustion. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke early and prepared a special breakfast. Jessica's favorite blueberry pancakes and decaffeinated coffee. Harold returned from his daily morning walk, quietly entering through the back door to avoid waking anyone. "Is the little prince awake yet?" he whispered, washing his hands at the kitchen sink without being asked. "I heard some fussing earlier," I replied. "But it's been quiet for about 30 minutes. As if on cue, baby James began crying from the nursery. Jessica appeared in the doorway moments later, hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, the baby wailing in her arms. "He won't stop crying," she said accusingly, as if we were somehow responsible. Harold dried his hands and approached with a gentle smile. "May I try?" "Sometimes babies just need a change of arms." "I've tried everything," Jessica snapped. "He's not wet, he's not hungry, he just won't stop." Harold reached toward the screaming infant. "Let me just rock him a bit. I used to be good at calming Michael down." What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to react. Jessica jerked away from Harold's outstretched hands and physically shoved him backward with her free arm. Harold, caught off balance, stumbled against the kitchen counter. "Don't touch him! You're filthy!" she screamed. Her face contorted with rage. "You've been outside. Do you want him to get sick and die?" The kitchen fell silent except for the baby's continued crying. Harold stood frozen, shock etched across his face. I moved instinctively to steady my husband, noticing how he braced himself against the counter, his knuckles white. "I washed my hands," he said quietly, holding them up as evidence. "I would never put James at risk." Jessica wasn't listening. She continued her tirade, bouncing the screaming baby. "You're always touching dirt in that garden. You probably have all kinds of bacteria. Stay away from my son." Michael walked into this chaotic scene, hair wet from his shower. "What's going on? Why is everyone yelling?" Jessica immediately turned to him, her version of events pouring out. "Your father tried to grab James without washing his hands. He's been outside with all those germs, and when I protected our son, your mother gave me the dirtiest look." Michael looked confused, glancing between us. "Dad wouldn't do that. He always washes up after his walk." "Are you calling me a liar?" Jessica's voice reached a dangerous pitch that made the baby cry harder. "No, I just think there's been a misunderstanding." Michael offered weakly, not definitively defending either side. Harold shook his head sadly and walked out of the kitchen without another word. I watched my 70-year-old husband, a man who had fought in Vietnam, taught generations of students, and never raised his voice in anger, retreat from his own home. I found him sitting on our bed, staring at his clean, weathered hands. When I sat beside him, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, the beginning of a bruise forming on his upper arm where Jessica had shoved him. 9 years, he said softly. 9 years, we've opened our home, given them money, watched our boundaries disappear, and now I can't even approach my own grandson. I placed my hand over his. "This has to stop, Harold." He nodded. "Yes, it does." In that moment, something crystallized within me. For years, I had prioritized keeping the peace over maintaining my dignity and protecting my husband. No more. I texted Michael asking to meet me at the coffee shop down the street at 5 o'clock. Alone. As I helped Harold apply arnica to his bruised arm, I knew exactly what needed to be said. 3 simple words that would change everything. The local coffee shop had been my refuge for years. The baristas knew my order, chamomile tea with honey, and I'd spent countless hours in the corner booth escaping the tension at home. Today, however, I wasn't seeking escape. I was finally confronting the problem. Michael arrived 15 minutes late, already defensive before I'd said a word. If this is about this morning, Jessica was just being protective. First-time mom and all that. I stirred my tea calmly. This isn't just about this morning, Michael. It's about the last 9 years. Not this again. He sighed dramatically. You've always had issues with Jessica. She tries so hard to make things work. Does shoving your father count as trying hard? I kept my voice level despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. She didn't shove him. She was protecting James. His automatic defense of Jessica was so predictable it almost made me sad. I reached into my purse and placed my phone on the table between us, displaying a photo I'd taken of Harold's arm. The bruise had darkened to an ugly purple smudge against his pale skin. This is what protecting James looks like, physically assaulting a 70-year-old man. Michael's face changed as he stared at the photo. That could have come from anything. Dad bruises easily at his age. It came from Jessica's hand when she shoved him for trying to comfort his crying grandson. After he had washed his hands, I might add. Michael shifted uncomfortably. You're exaggerating. It wasn't that forceful. 9 years, Michael. I continued, ignoring his dismissal. For 9 years, we've opened our home to you and Jessica. We've given you money when you needed it. We've endured Jessica's criticism, her rearranging our home, her treating us like unwelcome guests in our own house. That's not fair, he began, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Your father had a heart attack last year, and Jessica complained about how inconvenient his recovery was for her dinner plans. I've been called old, outdated, and useless in my own kitchen. My sewing room was taken without discussion. Every boundary we've tried to establish has been trampled. Michael stared into his untouched coffee. You make it sound so one-sided. Then tell me your side, I challenged. Tell me what we've done to deserve being treated this way. His silence spoke volumes. Finally, he mumbled, We pay rent. $500 a month for a 4-bedroom house in this neighborhood that's less than a quarter of market rate. And how many thousands have we given you over the years? The credit card bailout alone was $15,000. We're family, he said weakly. Families help each other. Yes, they do, and families treat each other with respect. I leaned forward. Today was the final straw, Michael. No one touches my husband that way. No one calls him filthy when he's the cleanest, most considerate man I've ever known. What are you saying? Michael finally looked up, wariness in his eyes. I took a deep breath and delivered the 3 words I'd rehearsed in my mind. Move out now. His face registered shock, then anger. We have a newborn. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You have 30 days. But our finances are not my concern anymore, I interrupted. You have a good job. Jessica can return to work. Figure it out. This is about the baby, isn't it? Michael's voice rose. You're jealous that Jessica gets to make the rules about James. I laughed without humor. The rules, Michael, we haven't been allowed to hold him. Your father was physically assaulted for trying to comfort his own grandson. This isn't about rules. It's about basic human decency. If we leave, you might not see James, he threatened. Jessica will never forgive this. That's a risk I'm willing to take, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I love you, Michael. I love James, but I also love Harold and myself enough not to tolerate this situation any longer. Michael stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, you'll wish you hadn't pushed your family away. I'm not pushing family away, I replied calmly. I'm requiring that family treat each other with respect. The choice is yours. What happens next? He stormed out without another word. I sat finishing my tea, feeling an odd mixture of heartbreak and peace. On the drive home, I questioned my decision repeatedly, but kept returning to the image of Harold's bruised arm and defeated eyes. When I arrived, Harold was waiting anxiously. How did it go? I told him they need to move out. 30 days. His eyes widened. You actually did it? Yes, and Michael didn't take it well. Harold took my hands in his. Are you okay with this decision? Really okay? I think I'm more okay than I've been in years, I admitted. It hurt, but it also felt right. When Michael returned home that evening, Jessica was already packing frantically, tears streaming down her face. She barely looked at me as she carried armfuls of baby clothes to their room. You're ruining everything, she hissed when she passed me in the hallway. My son will never know his grandparents because of your selfishness. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that would penetrate her anger. Michael maintained a stony silence, refusing to make eye contact. That night, Harold and I retreated to our bedroom early, the tension in the house too thick to bear. Do you think we'll ever have a relationship with James? Harold whispered in the darkness. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I do know we couldn't continue like this. The next week was excruciating. Jessica and Michael acted as if we were invisible, speaking to each other in pointed whispers. The baby's cries echoed through the house, but Jessica would leave any room I entered, taking James with her. Word spread quickly among family and friends. My phone rang constantly with concerned calls. Sarah and David drove in from neighboring states, rallying around Harold and me once they heard the full story. "This should have happened years ago," Sarah said firmly after seeing Harold's arm now yellowed but still visibly bruised. "They've taken advantage of you for too long." David arranged a family meeting without Jessica present. Michael reluctantly joined us at Sarah's insistence. "I don't understand why you're all ganging up on Jessica," he complained. "She's just protective of James." "This isn't about just the baby," David explained patiently. "This is about years of disrespect. Are you happy living this way? Mike? Really happy?" Something in Michael's expression cracked. For a brief moment, I glimpsed my son beneath the defensive husband. "It's complicated," he finally admitted. "Jessica has certain expectations about how things should be." "And what about your expectations?" Sarah pressed. "What about Mom and Dad's right to peace in their own home?" The conversation continued for hours, painful but necessary. Though Michael made no promises about the future, I sensed the first hairline fracture in the wall he'd built between us. 3 weeks after our coffee shop confrontation, Michael and Jessica moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. They hired movers to avoid asking for help loading 9 years of accumulated possessions into a truck, while Harold and I watched silently from the living room window. As their car pulled away with baby James secured in his car seat, I felt tears streaming down my face. "Did we do the right thing?" I whispered. Harold put his arm around my shoulders. "The right thing isn't always the easy thing." The house felt eerily quiet that first night. We changed the locks, a precaution Sarah had insisted upon, and began the process of reclaiming our space. Jessica's decorative touches were removed one by one. Harold's garden tools returned to their proper places. My sewing machine came back from the garage where it had been exiled. We redecorated the nursery, transforming it back into my sewing room, but keeping one corner with a small crib and changing table, holding on to hope that someday our grandson would be welcomed there. 2 months passed with no contact, despite my text messages asking about James. I sent cards marking his monthly milestones that received no acknowledgement. Harold suggested we respect their space and stop reaching out for a while. "They need to process this in their own way," he reasoned. "Pushing will only make things worse." Without the constant tension at home, Harold's health improved dramatically. His blood pressure returned to normal levels, and he spent joyful hours in his garden. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, too embarrassed to invite them into the hostile environment our home had become. I worked hard on forgiving myself for enabling the situation for so long. My therapist helped me understand that my desire to help Michael had blinded me to the unhealthy dynamics developing under our roof. "You were trying to be a good mother," she assured me. "But sometimes being a good mother means setting firm boundaries." Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after they'd moved out, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find Michael standing alone on the porch, looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I invited him in, noticing how he hesitated at the threshold, as if seeing the house with new eyes. Harold emerged from his study, surprise and cautious hope on his face. We sat in the living room that now looked completely different from when they'd left. Michael twisted his wedding band nervously. "I owe you both an apology." He began, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months." "How's James?" Harold asked gently. Michael's face softened. "Growing fast. Smiling now." He pulled out his phone and showed us photos of our grandson, now chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed. "He's beautiful," I whispered, hungry for any glimpse of the grandchild I barely knew. "Jessica isn't here with you," Harold observed carefully. Michael sighed deeply. "No, she doesn't know I'm here. We've been having problems for a long time, but they've gotten worse since we moved out. The apartment is expensive, she still isn't working, and she blames you for everything that's wrong." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think I've been blind," he admitted. "The way Jessica treated you both wasn't right. I see that now. Living on our own, having to manage everything ourselves, it's shown me how much you did for us and how little appreciation we showed." "You were caught in the middle," Harold said kindly. "That couldn't have been easy." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "But I chose wrong. I should have stood up for you both. I should never have let Jessica speak to you that way, let alone put hands on Dad." He turned to Harold. "I'm so sorry about your arm." Harold nodded, accepting the apology without words. "Would you like to see James?" Michael asked suddenly. "I could bring him this weekend when Jessica visits her parents." The joy that surged through me was almost painful. We would love that more than anything. And so began our careful reconnection. Michael brought James for short visits every few weeks. We established a meeting place at a nearby park neutral ground where we could bond with our grandson without the complications of home territories. I treasure the memory of Harold holding James for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks as the baby grabbed at his glasses with curious fingers. 6 months after moving out, Michael and Jessica began marriage counseling. According to Michael, the sessions were revealing long-standing issues beyond their relationship with us. "Jessica has some childhood trauma she's never addressed," he explained during one visit. "Her parents were extremely controlling. She's repeating patterns without realizing it." I established clear boundaries for any future relationship. We would not provide financial support. We would not tolerate disrespect. We would not compete for James's affection or undermine their parenting, but we would expect reasonable access to our grandson. When James turned 1, we were invited to his birthday party, the first time we'd seen Jessica since they moved out. She was civil but distant, clearly making an effort for Michael's sake. 2 months later, Michael called with news that broke my heart, but didn't surprise me they were separating. Jessica had moved back with her parents, taking James, but agreeing to shared custody. "I should have listened to you years ago," Michael said tiredly. "You saw what I couldn't see." "You weren't ready to see it," I replied gently. When Michael asked if he could stay with us temporarily while finding a new place, we agreed, but with clear terms. He would pay rent. He would respect our routines and privacy. It would be temporary with a defined timeline. He moved into the guest room, not his old bedroom, and our relationship slowly transformed into something healthier. He was no longer the entitled son with a demanding wife, but a mature adult working to rebuild broken trust. Today, a year after that fateful morning in our kitchen, our family has found a new equilibrium. Michael lives in his own apartment, co-parenting James with Jessica through a structured arrangement. Harold and I have regular grandparent time, taking James for weekend afternoons, filled with cookies and story time. Jessica remains cool toward us, but has recognized that keeping James from his grandparents only hurts him. The boundaries we've established have actually improved our limited interactions. Without the pressure of forced proximity, we can all be civil for James's sake. Standing up to my son with those 3 words, "Move out now," was the hardest thing I've ever done. It would have been easier to continue accommodating their disrespect to maintain access to my grandson. But that would have taught James that love means enduring mistreatment, that family bonds justify abuse. Instead, I hope we've shown him that true family love requires mutual respect, that kindness doesn't mean becoming a doormat, that healthy relationships have boundaries. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is say, "No more," to those taking advantage of our generosity. It might seem harsh in the moment, but in the long run, it gives everyone the opportunity to grow. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and maintaining your self-respect? Would you have handled our situation differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. And if you know someone struggling with family boundaries, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these challenges is the greatest gift. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your peace and dignity.